Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the common knowledge is small town America is dying. You know, corporate America has abandoned most of the small communities. Because look, you know, I talk about company towns from, you know, the 1800s, 1880s, and how, you know, the town was the central way of workers living. You shopped at the company store, went to the company doctor. You were basically owned by the company. Well, we got away from that for a little bit, and we got into these. Well, there's one major corporation in a town, and they were basically the company town. A little different, but still dependent on the corporation. And when they abandoned us, left nothing but a shell of communities, well, there was nothing left behind. And our political system, as broken as it has been, has left them behind as well. So are you surprised that people desperate would vote for someone like the former guy? I wasn't. But still have to help these rural communities in a certain way. So what do you do if you're in one of these places? Well, you reach out to your representative. What would you do if your representative said, well, you don't like it, move? That's exactly what's going on in Ohio. And my next guest, David Pepper, the former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party and author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. This is where he went to Manchester, Ohio, and said, look at what's going on here, because their representative told them just to move. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for hiding that story. I'm horrified every time I think about it, both the condition of the town and the fact that we now have a political system where the voters don't get to tell the failed representative that he should leave, but he feels so confident in this gerrymandered system that he tells them they should go. And what I didn't say in that video that I taped earlier this week is it's what happened. For the first time in 90 years, the population of Manchester is under 2,000 people. That state senator served out all his terms, and now he's got a job with the Department of Transportation. I mean, it's a messed up system economically and politically when you see those outcomes.
And the thing is, it's not just Manchester, Ohio. I mean, if this was just one story, one outrage, the sad reality of this is what's going on across this country and has been for a very long time, David, as you know.
It's all over. I mean, there's some towns in Ohio that are hanging in there. You know, so sometimes they'll have a university. So Bowling Green looks pretty good. Marietta looks pretty good. Sometimes that main employer didn't leave. You know, Findlay, Ohio's hanging in there. Some other places. But a lot of them, as you said, the big employer left or was bought out and dwindled down to nothing. You know, thousands of jobs are now hundreds at best. The largest employer is now either a hospital or the government itself. The big private employer is gone. They don't have a university or something keeping it all together. And a lot of these towns literally have no idea how they're supposed to compete in the 21st century. And leaders are like that guy. He just says, oh, I don't know either. So you just got to move. It's just a failed system economically right now. And it's painful to see. You know, I've been to Manchester many times. My wife grew up nearby. We have a little property out nearby. It still makes my blood boil every time I go there in this, you know, the wealthiest country in the world, right up against the river where you'd have all this potential. It's just empty storefront after empty storefront. And some of these are beautiful old buildings and really no hope or no opportunity for these places.
And then in those communities, the lack of hope, the lack of opportunity is then filled with drug abuse and alcohol abuse and violence and criminal activity and all of the negative things we see in society.
Opioids.
Because we haven't had any investment in those communities. And this is where I bring this back to what Joe Biden's trying to do with his Build Back Better plan. The kind of investment that we need in this country to help communities like Manchester, to help communities all across this country just like that.
Yeah, and I think that I'm so glad he went to Scranton, because I often think that these towns assume that when Democrats talk about infrastructure and healthcare and even digital stuff, that, oh, it's not for us. That's for like some big Democratic city somewhere. And I think Democrats need to lean in and be very explicit. No. We're talking about you too. We're talking about big cities, of course, mid-sized towns, but also these small towns, even if they voted for someone you don't agree with, that this is for them. And here's the irony is the gerrymandered representatives, like the guy who told them to move, almost everything they are voting for are the kind of trickle-down economics that undermine this town's chance of surviving on every front. They need more health care. They have an opioid epidemic. They need more Medicaid. They need more infrastructure. The tax breaks at the top don't trickle down in any way to these places. In Ohio, it was cuts to local government that, like Manchester, that paid for tax breaks at the top. That was the Kasich formula. So almost every single vote cast by those who represent these places undermine their ability to advance. And it's the Build Back Better plan and plans like it that actually give these places a shot. But we need to, we need to be much more explicit. And that's why I've been hoping that Joe Biden went to Scranton early. He knows, and he can speak to these places, that this is for you guys. This is for Manchester. We know you need a flood wall. We know your Main Street is falling apart. That's what this will do. And to be more explicit, Tim Ryan, we talked about him in the past. He was in this county not long ago. He's going to these places. That's what we have to do if we're going to have, any chance of making inroads.
And this is why it's so frustrating with Joe Manchin, who is just the fly in all of this ointment. The kind of investment that we need for places like Manchester, or basically the entire state of West Virginia, which it makes no sense to me that he's trying to undercut this entire program when it would make a state like West Virginia much better for his constituents. And if he's got ambitions of being governor again, this would be a great platform to run on. Hey, look what I brought back.
Absolutely. I mean, this is bread and butter stuff that polling would tell you is actually popular across the board. I mean, infrastructure is the one thing that most people can step up and say, yeah, we need that. But to your point, it's got to be big enough that people see that it's making a difference in their community. If all they see is some bridge 100 miles away they never go to, get repaired, and it never gets to them, it doesn't really make enough of a difference. So when you winnow away at the size and you just hack away with it because you're trying to, score points in some other way, the negative of that is that the towns that really need it may never see it. And then you just defeated the whole purpose. And those places need it, again, as much as anybody, if not more. I mean, the condition of these places, again, what's in Manchester will look very similar to some places in West Virginia. And if it's going to make a difference in a town like Manchester, that small, it's going to have to be big enough that you can really get it out there. Yeah. And so, I think it's self-defeating. It'll sound like some big package, but if it doesn't go to those places, then it fulfills what they already think. Oh, that wasn't for us. That was for somewhere else. And then the downward spiral, both politically and in actually outcomes, continues.
Yeah, but what do you say to the person? And I had a conversation with someone today who said, well, they should just leave. There's nothing there. Just go somewhere else. What do you say to that argument?
Yeah, I'd say everyone has a right to decide where they want to be. Okay. So, but don't you get yourself elected state representative and be making that case. See, your job is to actually lift the place. We all should want people to stay in these places, especially young people. We need them there. But people have a right to make decisions. So I'm not going to tell people exactly what to do. But if you're elected to represent that place and you have been in office for years with the job to help them, maybe the dad says to the kid, hey, I think you should leave. I'm not going to get into their conversation. But the state senator, he doesn't get to say that. If he thinks it's so bleak that that's the advice he's giving, it's time for him to leave.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to have any clue. He doesn't have an idea, and he shouldn't be in that position. I mean, clearly, but
it means he's failed. It's time for him to go. But I do think, one of it's soft infrastructure, but the fact that so many people are leaving these places, the next generation, the high school, valedictorian is probably going to University of Cincinnati, by the way, number 2 in the country. I'm wearing their sweatshirt, and doesn't go back. That brain drain, whether it's to other parts of Ohio or to other parts of the country, is also really hurting these places. So we should figure out ways to make it compelling for them to stay. We should stop doing things that make it so they feel like they should go if they want to succeed in life. And we of course need to get rid of elected officials who don't have any answers but telling their own constituents it may be time for them and their family to go elsewhere.
Now, this may sound like pandering or just partisan hackery, and I don't want to go down that road. And I know you, as former Ohio Democratic chair, will go along. I'm going to assume that this representative that you're talking about is a Republican, because the ideology there on the Republican side, in my view, has always been government can't and shouldn't do anything to fix these problems. So it sounds to me like, and I don't know that he was a Republican. I'm assuming, because that's the ideology, that you should pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and so what if you don't have bootstraps, crawl on your hands and knees, whatever, but government can't help, and we won't let government help. That's been their ideology and their battle cry for a long time. So I'm actually not surprised if it is a Republican.
Yeah, it was, and frankly, I've met him a few times. He's a nice enough guy, all that.
They always are.
But he's voted, he voted again and again to take funds from the very small budget of the city of Manchester Village to give to Columbus, to give tax breaks to people at the top. So it's not only put yourself up with your bootstraps. And I was a council member, county commissioner, so I understood this. There was revenue sharing for almost a century in Ohio between local and state. He was one of the generation of politicians, again, John Kasich led this, who decided it's time for us to take money from these small towns and big cities and redirect it to Columbus in the form of tax breaks at the top under trickle-down theory. So it's not even like go pick yourself up. It's we're going to take from you. And by the way, when did they take from them? After 2010, when these towns were still trying to recover from the recession. So it's worse than even sort of a status quo, you're failing. It's we're taking from you for a failed theory. And that's what makes it, to me, doubly frustrating.
Which is why I think it's important, your video and the book that you've got out, Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines, and we'll get links on it, how people can take a look at that. But I think it's important pointing this stuff out because, I have conversations with people who have declared themselves as Republicans, and I ask them why. What is it about the ideology that brings you to this position? Because my view is exactly what we've been talking about. They don't believe in government. They believe government is bad, and then they go out and set to prove it. So why do I want someone like that in my government, running our government? I don't.
Yeah, and one of the things I get into in the book, I appreciate you mentioning, is these state houses. And so the book is basically a wake-up call about how horrible these state houses have become. And one of the things that's happening is these state capitals are just incestuous places where private interests are always in the face of this type of state senator. And far too often, they're making decisions that benefit those private interests. The First Energy Company, private charter schools that have been, or online profit-making charter schools that have ripped money out of public schools. So too often, it's not just that they don't believe in government. They're literally in office, having taken an oath to the Ohio Constitution, and most of what they're doing is supporting private interests getting public assets, fees to pay the energy companies subsidies, public dollars that were meant for public schools being driven to for-profit charter schools that turn out to be scams. So it's either egregious corruption or just a broader pay-to-play culture that is driving so much of the legislating. It has nothing to do with serving public outcomes anymore or the public interests of Manchester. It's serving the people that have glommed onto this Columbus State House, and that's sort of who's in the face of these legislators. I try and bring that out because that also gets us to the bigger problem of national legislatures are now much more in the business of serving ALEC, serving the Koch brothers. And then how do you stay in office when you're serving only private interests and your public outcomes are terrible? You better play with the voting rules so you never get voted out of office. So that's what the book tries to explain. I know it sounds really bleak, and it is, but I actually think we're better off waking up to the reality than continuing to assume that most of these office holders are actually thinking every day about the public interest. I don't think most of them are anymore.
No, No, and this is where, because I hear this story about Manchester, and I watched your video, and it's good. I hope people will check it out on Twitter. And I'm going, why haven't the people thrown this bum out? Why is this not the campaign ad for the next election to where everyone turns against not just him, but everyone who has voted with him to create the environment that most people are suffering in? And what I know and what is sad about this is most of the people who are negatively affected by this either don't vote or vote against their own best economic interest out of some ridiculous ideological who's going to what bathroom or marrying what person.
Or they have no idea who this guy is. I mean, the bottom line is they don't know who he is. They have no idea what the state legislature does. And by the way, that's not a criticism. Most people don't. The state houses are the most anonymous levels of government in American government. And so most of those voters, the people who met with that state senator, that's like that's a very rare thing that they'd even think to call their state senator. Like, that's a rare meeting. The fact that he had the meeting and said go somewhere else is astounding, because most people don't even know who their state rep or state senator is. They maybe know who their governor is or the congressman. So I think it's partly what you described, but it's partly that these state houses are almost anonymous at this point. That because of gerrymandering, almost no election is contested. When do you get well known in politics? When you have an election. If you have no elections, no one knows who the heck you are. Yeah. And so it really also, and then we also have journalism cratering as an industry. So you don't even have coverage of the state house anymore. So it all kind of adds together that you have these very unaccountable politicians who aren't serving those cities. And like you said, are never kicked out of office despite egregious public outcomes.
No, and as you pointed out, especially in small towns, the local newspaper, they've been gone for years. So yeah. you don't get the local news or anything on those type of people. It's a horrible thing. But David, I appreciate the time. The issue not going to go away. Good on the book. Laboratories of Autocracy. Wake up call from behind the lines. We'll get links out on social media. How you can check.
I can say one thing.
Hit it.
I do put in the book a bunch of solutions. I don't want to leave everyone depressed. Now, my point is to have a wake-up call, but then I spent a lot of time saying, here's what you can do about it. So if people read the book, there are a whole lot of steps from federal, where they better pass voting rights, down to local, where you better register voters and get involved in state house campaigns. But I try and lay out solutions and not just tell everyone how bleak things are, even though it is pretty bleak right now in a lot of places.
Good stuff, David. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much. David Pepper, former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party. And get the book, Laboratories of Autocracy. We'll get links out. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people from the talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.